The sun was beginning to set on a warm Friday afternoon as Aisha Johnson drove home from Pine Creek Elementary, where she had spent the last 2 hours preparing her classroom for Monday's science experiment. After teaching 3rd grade for 8 years, Aisha had learned that preparation was everything when it came to keeping 28 energetic kids engaged with learning. She hummed along to the radio, windows cracked to let in the spring breeze, thinking about the weekend ahead. Her sister was coming over with her new baby, and Aisha had already prepared the guest room with fresh sheets and a small vase of flowers from her garden. These simple moments of anticipation were what kept her going through the busy school weeks. The flash of blue and red lights in her rearview mirror pulled her from these pleasant thoughts. Aisha checked her speedometer. She had been going exactly the speed limit. With a small sigh, she signaled and pulled over to the shoulder of Pine Road, just 3 blocks from her neighborhood entrance. What did I do wrong? She wondered, her heart beginning to beat a little faster as she reached for her purse to get her license. Aisha had been pulled over twice before in her life, once for a broken taillight and once for rolling through a stop sign when she was in college. Both times had been straightforward interactions. Show your papers, get your ticket, move on with your day. She rolled down her window completely and placed both hands on the steering wheel, just as her father had taught her years ago. Always be extra polite, always keep your hands visible, he'd said during one of their many father-daughter talks about navigating the world safely. The officer approached slowly, one hand resting near his holster, a detail that didn't escape Aisha's notice. He was a white man with a buzz cut, probably in his late 30s, with a name tag that read Officer R. Miller. License and registration, he said without preamble, not bothering to explain why he had pulled her over. Good afternoon, officer, Aisha replied with a polite smile. May I ask what I did wrong? The officer's face hardened. I said license and registration now. Aisha nodded, keeping her voice steady. Of course. My license is in my purse on the passenger seat, and my registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for them now, okay? Officer Miller didn't respond, just watched with narrowed eyes as she carefully took her wallet from her purse and removed her driver's license. Then, moving slowly, she opened the glove compartment and pulled out the registration. She handed both items to the officer, who snatched them from her hand. As he examined them, Aisha noticed 2 teenage boys had stopped their bikes on the sidewalk about 20 feet away. One of them had his phone out. Your tail light is broken, Officer Miller finally said. Though Aisha knew this wasn't true, she had just had her car serviced the previous week. I'm sorry, officer, but I had my car checked last week, and everything was working properly, she explained calmly. Something in the officer's expression changed then, a flash of anger that made Aisha's stomach tighten with unease. Are you calling me a liar? He demanded, his voice rising. No, sir, not at all, Aisha said quickly. I'm just confused because my mechanic didn't mention any issues with my lights. Officer Miller stepped back from the car. Step out of the vehicle. The command took her by surprise. May I ask why, officer? I'm not going to ask you again. Exit the vehicle now. His hand moved to rest on his holster again, a gesture that sent a chill through Aisha's body. By now, a small grocery store across the street had closed for the day, and a few workers were standing outside watching the scene unfold. A woman in a blue apron had also taken out her phone and appeared to be recording. Aisha took a deep breath. Officer, I've given you my license and registration. I'm not sure why I need to step out of the car for a taillight. Could you please explain? Instead of answering, Officer Miller reached for his radio. I've got a non-compliant subject on Pine Road and Maple Street. Requesting backup. Non-compliant? Aisha felt her heart rate spike. She had been nothing but polite. Looking in her side mirror, she could see more people had gathered. An older couple walking their dog had stopped, and a man in a business suit who had been getting into his car was now standing beside it, watching intently. Sir, I'm not being non-compliant, Aisha said, trying to keep her voice from shaking. I'm just asking for clarification. If you could please tell me why, because I said so. Officer Miller shouted, cutting her off. That's all the reason I need. The sudden aggression made Aisha flinch. In the distance, she could hear another siren approaching. The man in the business suit was now definitely recording with his phone, and he had moved closer. Step out now, or I will remove you myself, Officer Miller warned. His face flushed with anger. Aisha weighed her options. She could comply, even though every instinct told her something was very wrong here. or she could continue to assert her rights and risk escalation. "Officer," she tried one more time, "I understand you're doing your job, but I don't understand why a taillight violation requires me to exit my vehicle. Could you please—" She didn't get to finish her sentence. In one swift motion, Officer Miller grabbed the door handle, yanked it open, and reached for Aisha's arm. "You people always think you know better," he snarled, words that made Aisha's blood run cold. "Always questioning authority." As he began to pull her from the car, Aisha held onto the steering wheel with her free hand. "Please stop. I haven't done anything wrong." By now, at least 6 bystanders were recording the incident. The teenagers on bikes had moved closer, and one of them called out, "Hey, you can't do that. We're recording this." A second police car pulled up, and a younger officer stepped out, looking confused at the scene before him. "Miller, what's going on?" he called out. But Officer Miller wasn't listening. With a powerful yank, he pulled Aisha from her car, causing her to stumble onto the pavement. As she tried to regain her balance, he twisted her arm behind her back. "Stop resisting," he shouted. Though Aisha was doing nothing of the sort. "I'm not resisting," she cried out, tears springing to her eyes from the pain in her shoulder. "Please, you're hurting me." The second officer jogged over, concern evident on his face. "Miller, ease up, man. What's she done?" "Broken taillight and refusing to comply with orders," Miller growled, forcing Aisha's other arm behind her back and reaching for his handcuffs. The growing crowd of onlookers began to protest. "Her taillight isn't even broken," called the woman in the blue apron who had crossed the street to get a better view. "This is wrong," shouted one of the teenagers. "We've got it all on video." The second officer looked uncomfortable, glancing between his colleague, the restrained woman, and the gathering crowd with their phones held high. He reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Chen, requesting supervisor presence at Pine and Maple." As Miller snapped the handcuffs around Aisha's wrists, she looked around at the faces of the strangers who had stopped to witness what was happening to her. Some looked angry, others concerned, but none looked away. Their eyes and their cameras were fixed on the scene, documenting every moment. Aisha took a shaky breath, trying to stay composed despite the panic rising in her chest. She knew in that moment that whatever happened next would not stay hidden. Not with so many witnesses, not with so many recordings. Little did she know that in just 4 minutes, those videos would begin spreading across social media like wildfire, and Officer Miller's actions would face scrutiny from far beyond the small crowd gathered on Pine Road. The clock was ticking. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into Aisha's wrists as she stood beside her car, trying to make sense of how a routine traffic stop had spiraled so dramatically out of control. Her legs felt unsteady beneath her, but she forced herself to stand tall, unwilling to give Officer Miller the satisfaction of seeing her breakdown. "Check her taillight," called out the woman in the blue apron who had crossed from the grocery store. "Show everyone it's not even broken." Officer Chen, the younger cop who had just arrived, hesitated before walking to the back of Aisha's car. He bent slightly to examine the taillight in question. "Miller," he said, straightening up with a frown. "Both taillights are functioning properly." A murmur rippled through the growing crowd of bystanders. There were at least 15 people now, most with phones raised, capturing every moment of the unfolding scene. Officer Miller's face flushed a deeper shade of red. "She was driving erratically," he snapped, changing his story. "And she refused to comply with a direct order." "That's not true," Aisha protested, finding her voice despite the fear constricting her throat. "I was driving the speed limit, and I only asked why I needed to step out of the car. That's my right as a citizen." A middle-aged man in a postal worker uniform stepped forward from the crowd. "I was driving behind her for 3 blocks. She was driving perfectly fine, using her turn signals and everything." Officer Miller turned toward the postal worker, his expression darkening. "Stay back and mind your own business unless you want to be arrested for interfering with police business." "Are you threatening a witness?" Called out the businessman in the suit, his phone still recording. "Because that's what I just heard, and I've got it all on video." The atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Officer Chen looked deeply uncomfortable, glancing repeatedly at his radio as if willing his supervisor to arrive faster. Aisha took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. She had read about situations like this, had seen them play out on the news, but never imagined she would find herself at the center of such an encounter. 8 years of teaching third graders had given her practice in remaining calm during chaos, and she drew on that experience now. "Officer Miller," she said, keeping her voice level. I believe you're violating my Fourth Amendment rights. I've identified myself, provided my documentation, and there's clearly no probable cause for this detention or search. Miller stepped closer to her, his face just inches from hers. You think you're smart, don't you? Quoting the Constitution at me. I've been doing this job for 15 years. I know a troublemaker when I see one. The naked contempt in his voice made several onlookers gasp. The teenagers who had been watching from their bikes moved closer, their young faces serious and determined as they captured the exchange. We've got to send this to the news, one whispered to the other, loudly enough for everyone to hear. Just then, a third police car pulled up, and an older African-American officer with captain's bars on his uniform stepped out. Captain Thomas took in the scene with one swift, experienced glance. The handcuffed woman standing calmly by her car, Officer Miller's aggressive posture, the younger officer's discomfort, and the crowd of citizens with phones raised. What's going on here, Miller? Captain Thomas asked, his deep voice cutting through the tension. Before Miller could answer, several voices from the crowd called out at once. He dragged her out of her car for no reason. He lied about her taillight being broken. He's violating her rights. Captain Thomas held up a hand. One at a time, please. He turned to Officer Chen. Give me your assessment, officer. Chen straightened his posture. Sir, I arrived to find Officer Miller in the process of removing Miss Johnson from her vehicle. He initially stated she was pulled over for a broken taillight, but I've confirmed both taillights are functioning properly. Multiple witnesses state the subject was driving normally before being pulled over. Captain Thomas nodded and turned to Aisha. Ma'am, are you injured in any way? Aisha felt a wave of relief at being addressed respectfully for the first time since the blue lights had appeared in her mirror. My shoulder hurts where he twisted my arm, but I don't think anything's broken. Remove those handcuffs, Captain Thomas ordered Miller, who remained frozen in place, his jaw working silently. That's an order, officer. With visible reluctance, Miller stepped forward and roughly unlocked the handcuffs. Aisha winced as circulation returned to her hands, rubbing her wrists where the metal had left angry red marks. Now, Ms. Johnson, Captain Thomas continued, I'd like to hear your version of events, if you're willing to share it. Aisha nodded and began recounting the traffic stop, her voice growing steadier as she spoke. She described Miller's refusal to explain why she was pulled over, his aggressive demand that she exit the vehicle, and his use of force when she simply asked for clarification. As she spoke, more people joined the gathering, drawn by the unusual sight of 3 police cars and a crowd on the usually quiet street. Someone had brought Aisha a bottle of water, which she gratefully accepted, pausing her account to take a sip. Meanwhile, Officer Miller stood to the side, his arms crossed defensively across his chest, occasionally shaking his head or muttering under his breath as Aisha spoke. When she finished, Captain Thomas turned to the crowd. Did anyone witness the entire interaction from the beginning? Several hands went up, including those of the teenage boys on bikes. We saw the whole thing, said one of the teens, a lanky boy with glasses. We were right there when he pulled her over. She was super polite and he was aggressive from the start. He said, "You people always think you know better," added the postal worker, his expression grim. We all heard it. Check the videos if you don't believe us. Captain Thomas's expression remained professional, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. He turned to Officer Miller. Is this accurate, officer? Miller's face had taken on a sullen cast. She was disrespectful and non-compliant. I acted according to protocol when faced with a subject refusing lawful orders. That's not what happened, called several voices from the crowd. The woman in the blue apron stepped forward. I've already uploaded my video to Facebook. Everyone can see what really happened. Indeed, phones throughout the crowd were not just recording, but actively sharing. Fingers tapped at screens, uploading videos to various platforms, sending them to local news stations, sharing them in community groups. Captain Thomas seemed to realize the situation was rapidly escalating beyond a roadside incident. Ms. Johnson, you're free to go. No citations will be issued today. He handed her a card. This has my direct contact information. I'd like you to come to the station tomorrow to file a formal statement if you're willing. Aisha took the card with slightly trembling fingers. Thank you, Captain. Officer Miller, Captain Thomas continued, his voice hardening. You're on administrative leave effective immediately. Surrender your badge and weapon to me now. A collective gasp went up from the crowd, followed by murmurs of approval. Miller's face contorted with disbelief and rage. "You can't do that." Not based on the word of, he cut himself off, but the implication hung in the air. Based on the word of over a dozen witnesses and multiple video recordings. Captain Thomas finished for him, his voice like steel. "Your badge and weapon, officer, now." For a moment it seemed Miller might refuse. His hand hovered near his holster and several onlookers tensed. But then, with jerky movements, he unpinned his badge and unholstered his gun, handling it properly before passing both items to his superior officer. "This isn't over," Miller muttered, just loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "You're right about that," replied the businessman with the phone, who had edged closer. "My brother-in-law is an attorney with the ACLU. I've already sent him everything I recorded." Aisha stood by her car, watching the scene unfold with a surreal sense of detachment. Just 20 minutes ago, she had been thinking about her sister's visit, about the science project for her students, about ordinary things that made up an ordinary life. Now she found herself at the center of what was quickly becoming a social media firestorm. As if on cue, several phones in the crowd pinged with notifications. The woman in the blue apron looked down at her screen and let out a low whistle. "My video already has over 3,000 shares," she said, looking up at Aisha with wide eyes. "And I posted it less than 4 minutes ago." Captain Thomas overheard this and sighed heavily. "Ms. Johnson, do you have someone who can come pick you up? I'm concerned about your ability to drive safely after this incident, and frankly, I'd prefer you not drive away alone right now." Aisha understood what he wasn't saying, that Officer Miller's "this isn't over" might have been more than just empty words. She nodded and reached for her phone to call her sister. As she did, she noticed her hands were finally steady again. The fear that had gripped her was giving way to something else, a resolve that whatever happened next, her voice would be heard. That Officer Miller's actions would not be swept under the rug. That maybe, just maybe, her ordeal might lead to meaningful change. Little did she know just how far and fast the backlash was already spreading. Aisha sat in her sister Tamika's kitchen, watching her phone light up with notifications faster than she could process them. It had been just over an hour since the incident with Officer Miller, and the videos were spreading across social media platforms like wildfire. Her hands still trembled slightly as she sipped the hot tea Tamika had made her. "You need to turn that thing off for a while," Tamika said gently, bouncing her 4-month-old daughter on her hip. "You've been through enough today." Aisha nodded but couldn't seem to put the phone down. The comments under the videos ranged from outrage on her behalf to people sharing their own similar experiences. Local news stations were already reaching out through social media, asking for interviews. A community activist group had announced an emergency gathering at City Hall that evening. "I can't believe how fast this is happening," Aisha murmured. "That teenager's video has over 50,000 views already." The doorbell rang, making both sisters jump. Tamika handed the baby to Aisha and went to check who was there. Through the kitchen window, Aisha could see 3 news vans parked along the street. "How did they find your address?" Tamika called from the hallway, peering through the peephole. "I have no idea," Aisha replied, cradling her niece close, finding comfort in the baby's warmth. "I haven't told anyone where I am." Tamika returned to the kitchen, shaking her head. "It's Channel 5 and Channel 9. They want statements." "I'm not ready for that," Aisha said, the thought of cameras making her stomach clench. The events of the afternoon were still too raw, too close. Her phone rang. Captain Thomas's number flashed on the screen. She handed the baby back to Tamika and answered. "Ms. Johnson, this is Captain Thomas. I wanted to check how you're doing and update you on a few developments." His deep voice came through the speaker. "I'm at my sister's house," Aisha replied. "There are news vans outside." Captain Thomas sighed audibly. "I was afraid of that. One of your videos has gone national already. CNN picked it up about 20 minutes ago." Aisha sank into a chair trying to process this information. National? But it just happened. The timing and clarity of the videos made them impossible to ignore, Captain Thomas explained. "Listen, I've called because there's going to be a press conference at police headquarters in 1 hour. The chief wants to address this head-on. He's asked if you would be willing to attend." Aisha's heart raced at the thought. "I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of attention." "I understand completely," Captain Thomas assured her. "Your presence isn't necessary, but I wanted to extend the invitation." Either way, I want you to know that Officer Miller has been officially suspended without pay, pending a full investigation, and the chief will be making a public apology to you during the press conference. A notification popped up on Aisha's phone, a text from one of her fellow teachers with a link to a national news website. The headline read, "Breaking. Video shows officer dragging black woman from car without cause." "Ms. Johnson, are you still there?" Captain Thomas asked after her prolonged silence. "Yes, sorry," Aisha replied. "This is all happening so fast." "What should I do?" "That's entirely up to you," he said. "But if you want my advice, I'd suggest getting ahead of this. If you don't tell your story, others will tell it for you, and they might not get it right." After ending the call, Aisha sat in thought while Tamika prepared a quick dinner neither of them had the appetite to eat. The doorbell rang twice more, once for another news crew and once for Mr. Washington, their childhood neighbor who had seen the video and come to offer support. "The whole neighborhood is talking about it," Mr. Washington told them as they sat in the living room. "People are organizing a support rally for tomorrow morning." Aisha's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Rivera, the principal at her school. "The school board is issuing a statement of support for you. Don't worry about Monday. Take all the time you need. We're behind you 100%. These small gestures of support strengthened Aisha's resolve. She turned to Tamika. "I think I should go to the press conference." 30 minutes later, Aisha sat in Tamika's car as they navigated through unusually heavy traffic toward police headquarters. The radio news was already discussing the incident, with commentators analyzing the videos frame by frame. "Officer Miller has a history of complaints," one pundit was saying. 3 excessive force allegations in the past 2 years alone, all involving minority citizens. The question is, why was he still on patrol? Aisha turned off the radio, needing a moment of silence to collect her thoughts. Outside the police headquarters, a crowd had gathered, some with hastily made signs reading "Justice for Aisha" and "End Police Brutality." She was stunned to recognize faces from her school, fellow teachers, parents of her students, even a few of the older kids. "Ms. Johnson, Ms. Johnson," called out a small voice. It was Tyler, one of her third graders, waving excitedly from his father's shoulders. "We came to support you." The simple sincerity of the child's support brought tears to Aisha's eyes for the first time since the ordeal began. She had been running on adrenaline and shock, but now the emotional impact was beginning to break through. Inside the building, they were immediately escorted to a small conference room where Chief Wilson, a tall man with salt and pepper hair, was waiting alongside Captain Thomas and a woman who introduced herself as the department's public relations director. "Ms. Johnson, I cannot express how deeply sorry I am for what you experienced today," Chief Wilson said, shaking her hand firmly. "There is no excuse for Officer Miller's behavior, and I want to assure you that he will be held accountable." The PR director outlined what would happen at the press conference. The chief would make a statement, announce Miller's suspension, and outline immediate steps the department would take in response to the incident. If Aisha felt comfortable, she would have the opportunity to make a brief statement as well. "You don't have to decide now," the woman assured her. "You can see how you feel when the moment comes." As they prepared to enter the press room, Aisha's phone lit up with a text from one of the teenagers who had recorded the incident. "Just want you to know over 2 million people have seen what happened to you. The world is watching now. Stay strong." The press room was packed with reporters and cameras. Chief Wilson stepped up to the microphone first, his expression grave. "Today, our department failed in its duty to protect and serve," he began. "The actions of Officer Richard Miller during a traffic stop this afternoon were completely unacceptable and go against everything our department stands for. After reviewing video evidence and witness statements, I have placed Officer Miller on immediate suspension without pay, pending termination proceedings and possible criminal charges." A murmur ran through the assembled press corps. The chief continued, outlining a 5-point plan for department-wide retraining and the implementation of a civilian review board for all use of force incidents. Then he turned to Aisha. "Ms. Johnson has graciously agreed to be here today, despite the trauma she has endured. If she wishes to speak, we welcome her words." Aisha hadn't planned to speak, but standing there, feeling the weight of the moment, she knew she needed to find her voice. She approached the microphone, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. "What happened to me today should never happen to anyone," she began, her voice clear and steady. I'm a third-grade teacher. I spend my days teaching children to be kind, to be fair, and to stand up for what's right. Today I experienced firsthand what happens when those in positions of power forget these basic principles. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I'm grateful to the bystanders who recorded what happened and who spoke up in the moment. I'm grateful to Captain Thomas for doing the right thing when he arrived on the scene. And I'm grateful to Chief Wilson for his swift response. The cameras flashed as she continued. But this isn't just about one officer or one incident. This is about a system that too often allows power to go unchecked. As an educator, I know that true learning comes from acknowledging mistakes and taking concrete steps to do better. I hope today can be a turning point, not just for this police department but for our community as a whole. As Aisha stepped back from the microphone, the room erupted in questions from reporters. Chief Wilson fielded them one by one, reiterating his commitment to reform and accountability. Outside, the crowd had grown even larger. When Aisha emerged from the building, a spontaneous cheer went up. People she had never met reached out to shake her hand or offer words of support. A young woman approached, tears in her eyes. The same thing happened to my brother last year, but nobody believed him because there was no video. Thank you for speaking up. Your voice is speaking for so many of us. As Aisha made her way through the crowd with Tamika by her side, she noticed a group of uniformed officers standing respectfully to one side. One of them, an older officer with kind eyes, stepped forward. Ms. Johnson, he said, I just want you to know that most of us became police officers to help people, not hurt them. What happened to you today shames all of us who wear this badge. We stand with you in demanding better. His words, spoken with genuine remorse, touched something in Aisha. This wasn't about vilifying all police officers. It was about holding accountable those who abuse their power and working together to create meaningful change. As they drove home, Aisha checked her phone one last time. The hashtag #Justice for Aisha was trending nationwide, and a verified civil rights attorney had reached out offering to represent her pro bono. What had begun as a terrifying abuse of power had transformed in just a few hours into a powerful movement for accountability. Are you okay? Tamika asked, glancing over at her sister. Aisha gazed out at the city lights, reflecting on the extraordinary events of the day. No, she admitted honestly, but I think I will be. And maybe something good can come from all of this after all. Aisha woke up the next morning to sunlight streaming through her sister's guest room window and the gentle sounds of her niece babbling in the next room. For a blissful moment, yesterday's events seemed like a bad dream, until she reached for her phone. Over 300 notifications awaited her. The video of her encounter with Officer Miller had been viewed more than 8 million times overnight. Major news networks had picked up the story, and her name was trending on every social media platform. Even celebrities and politicians had shared the videos and expressed their outrage. You awake? Tamika called softly, knocking on the door. Unfortunately, Aisha replied, still staring at her phone in disbelief. Tamika entered with a cup of coffee and sat on the edge of the bed. Channel 7 is parked outside again, and there's about 30 people gathered down the street with signs. Aisha took a sip of coffee, trying to process this information. What kind of signs? Supportive ones, Tamika assured her. They're calling for Officer Miller to be fired and charged. Some of your students are there too, with their parents. The thought of her third graders witnessing all this made Aisha's heart ache. She taught them about justice and standing up for what's right, but she had never wanted them to learn these lessons because of something that happened to her. Her phone rang, an unknown number. She had received dozens of similar calls since yesterday, mostly from reporters, but something made her answer this one. Is this Aisha Johnson? A woman's voice asked. Yes, it is. Ms. Johnson, my name is Patricia Liu. I'm the mayor of Pine Creek. I was hoping we could meet today to discuss what happened yesterday and what our city needs to do in response. Aisha nearly dropped her phone. The mayor? Calling her directly? Yes, of course, she stammered. When and where? I'd like to come to you if that's all right, Mayor Liu replied. I understand there's quite a media presence where you're staying. I can have my security team ensure we have privacy. They arranged for the mayor to arrive at 11. After hanging up, Aisha sat in stunned silence until Tamika nudged her. The mayor? Tamika repeated, eyes wide. This is getting real, sis. Too real, Aisha murmured. I just wanted to go home from work yesterday. I never asked to become the center of a national conversation on police misconduct. But you are, Tamika said gently. And if anyone can handle this with grace and turn it into something positive, it's you. Aisha managed a small smile at her sister's faith in her. She had always been the quieter one, the rule follower, the peacemaker. Tamika was the firebrand, the one who led protests in college and worked for a nonprofit advocating for educational equity. Yet here Aisha was, thrust into the spotlight. After a quick shower and breakfast, Aisha checked her email. Among the flood of messages from journalists and well-wishers was one from Dr. Rivera, her principal, with the subject line, "We stand with you." It contained a photo of the school staff holding a banner with those words, along with drawings and cards her students had made for her. The sight of those familiar faces, the art teacher with her wild curly hair, the custodian who always saved apple slices for Aisha from the cafeteria, the reading specialist who brought homemade cookies to every staff meeting, brought tears to her eyes. This was her community, showing up for her when she needed them most. At precisely 11, two black SUVs pulled up outside. Mayor Liu, a petite woman in her 50s with a reputation for no-nonsense leadership, arrived with minimal fanfare. The mayor's security detail politely but firmly moved the lingering reporters back to give them privacy. "Ms. Johnson, thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Mayor Liu said as they settled in Tamika's living room. "First, I want to express my personal apology for what you experienced yesterday. It was unacceptable and I am deeply sorry." Aisha nodded, appreciating the direct approach. "Thank you, Mayor Liu." "I've reviewed all the videos and spoken at length with Chief Wilson," the mayor continued. "I've also been monitoring the public response. To say people are outraged would be an understatement." She opened her tablet and showed Aisha a map of the city with glowing dots representing social media posts about the incident. "This is just from the last 12 hours, she explained. "We've never seen engagement like this on a local issue. The city council held an emergency session this morning, and I want to share our response plan with you before we announce it publicly." Mayor Liu outlined a comprehensive set of actions: an independent investigation into Officer Miller's conduct, a review of all complaints against officers over the past 5 years, mandatory retraining for the entire police force on de-escalation techniques, and the fast-tracking of a body camera program that had been stuck in budget discussions for months. "We're also establishing a citizen police accountability board with real oversight power," Mayor Liu added, "and I'd like to ask if you would consider serving on it once you've had time to heal from this experience." Aisha was taken aback by the request. "Me? I don't have any background in law enforcement or policy." "That's precisely why we need you," the mayor replied. "We need educators, healthcare workers, everyday citizens who understand our community. We need people who will ask the simple, direct questions that professionals sometimes overlook." Before Aisha could respond, her phone buzzed with a news alert. The headline made her stomach drop. "Officer Miller claims racial targeting and suspension, says he's being made a scapegoat." Mayor Liu noticed her expression change. "You've just seen Miller's statement?" Aisha nodded wordlessly, passing her the phone. The mayor sighed heavily. "We anticipated this. It's a common deflection tactic. But the videos speak for themselves, and we have the statements from over 20 witnesses, including his fellow officer." "What happens now?" Aisha asked. "Now the legal process begins," Mayor Liu explained. "The district attorney is reviewing the case for possible criminal charges. But regardless of those outcomes, I want you to know that he will not be returning to the police force in this city." After the mayor left, promising to keep Aisha updated on developments, the house felt suddenly quiet. Tamika had taken the baby to her mother-in-law's to give Aisha space for the meeting, and now she found herself alone with her thoughts for the first time since the incident. She opened her laptop and, against her better judgment, began reading the online comments about her case. Most were supportive, expressing outrage at Officer Miller's conduct and admiration for her composure. But there were others, questioning why she hadn't simply gotten out of the car when asked, suggesting she must have done something to provoke the officer, even digging into her past for anything that could be used to discredit her. One comment in particular caught her eye. If she was white, this never would have made the news. The unfairness of that statement stung. She hadn't asked for any of this attention. She had simply been driving home from work, looking forward to a quiet Friday evening. A knock at the door pulled her from these painful thoughts. Through the peephole, she saw a group of people standing on the porch. Mrs. Chen, whose son was in her class. Mr. Rodriguez, whose daughter she had helped through a difficult time last year. And several other parents she recognized from school. When she opened the door, Mrs. Chen stepped forward with a large basket filled with home-cooked meals, gift cards, and small tokens of support. "We know you probably don't want to go grocery shopping with all the cameras around," Mrs. Chen explained. "So we brought food and moral support. And this," Mr. Rodriguez added, handing her a thick envelope. "It's cards from the kids. They're worried about you." Aisha invited them in, touched by their thoughtfulness. As they settled in the living room, Mrs. Chen spoke up. "We're organizing a community gathering tomorrow at the park. Not a protest, more of a show of unity. We'd love for you to come, but we understand completely if you're not up for it." "What kind of gathering?" Aisha asked. "Just neighbors coming together to talk about how we can make our community safer for everyone," Mr. Rodriguez explained. "The police chief has agreed to attend, along with several officers who want to be part of the solution. The mayor will be there too. And most importantly, regular folks from all over town," added another parent. "People who might never have talked to each other before are coming together because of what happened to you." Aisha felt a complex mix of emotions: gratitude for this outpouring of support, sorrow that it took such a traumatic event to spark these conversations, and a growing sense of responsibility. Her private ordeal had become a catalyst for change, and now she needed to decide what role she would play in that change. Later that afternoon, as she helped Tamika prepare dinner, her phone rang again. This time it was Captain Thomas. "Ms. Johnson, I wanted to give you a heads up. Officer Miller has hired an attorney who's been making some statements to the press. They're not flattering to you or to the department." "I saw some of it online," Aisha replied. "What you might not have seen is that a dozen officers from our department have signed an open letter condemning his actions and supporting your account of events. It'll be released tonight." Aisha paused, knife hovering over the carrot she'd been chopping. "Why are you telling me this?" There was a moment of silence before Captain Thomas answered. "Because I want you to know that what happened to you isn't something most officers support or defend. We're as horrified as everyone else, and we're fighting for change from within, just as the community is fighting from without." After they hung up, Aisha stepped outside onto Tamika's back porch. The evening was warm, with fireflies beginning to flicker in the gathering dusk. A sense of calm settled over her for the first time since the incident. Tomorrow would bring more challenges: the community gathering, more media requests, the continuing fallout from Officer Miller's counter-narrative. But tonight, she could take comfort in knowing she wasn't facing those challenges alone. Her phone chimed with a text from one of the teenage boys who had recorded the incident. "Just saw on the news that there are rallies happening in 12 cities tomorrow. All because you were brave enough to stand up for yourself. Thank you." Aisha looked up at the darkening sky, thinking about how a single moment of injustice, captured and shared, had sparked a movement that was growing beyond anything she could have imagined. Whatever came next, she was beginning to understand that her voice and the voices of all those standing with her had power that couldn't be ignored. The community's response had transformed her personal trauma into something larger than herself. And in that transformation, she was finding unexpected strength. 3 weeks had passed since that Friday afternoon when Aisha's life had changed forever. The morning sun streamed through her classroom windows as she arranged materials for the day's science lesson. It was her first day back at school, and despite her nervousness, it felt good to be surrounded by the colorful posters, well-worn books, and familiar scents of crayons and chalk that made up her professional home. The door opened, and Dr. Rivera, the principal, peeked in. "Everything ready for the troops?" Aisha smiled and nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." "They've missed you terribly," Dr. Rivera said, stepping into the room. "We all have. But I want you to know that if it gets overwhelming today, you just give me a signal and I'll step in." "Thank you," Aisha replied, genuinely touched by the support. "But I think this is exactly what I need right now. Some normalcy." The word normalcy hung in the air between them, both knowing that nothing had been normal since the incident. The videos of Officer Miller dragging Aisha from her car had now been viewed over 50 million times. She had appeared on national news programs, been invited to speak at community forums, and received messages of support from people all over the world. But there had been costs, too. The stress had left her with persistent headaches and trouble sleeping. Online trolls had dug into every aspect of her life, looking for anything to discredit her. Officer Miller's supporters, though a minority, had been vocal and sometimes threatening, necessitating a temporary security detail outside her home. The classroom door burst open, interrupting her thoughts as Tyler, one of her most enthusiastic students, rushed in. "Ms. Johnson." "You're really back," he exclaimed, his face lighting up with pure joy. "I really am," she laughed, accepting his enthusiastic hug. More students filtered in, some shy, others bursting with excitement to see her. A few parents lingered at the door, offering warm smiles and supportive nods. By the time the morning bell rang, Aisha felt a sense of rightness that had been missing for weeks. Teaching had always been her anchor, and today was no different. As she guided her students through a lesson about the water cycle, she felt the knot of anxiety in her chest begin to loosen. These children didn't see her as a symbol or a hashtag or a cause. They just saw their teacher, someone who cared about them and their learning. After school, Aisha drove to City Hall for a meeting of the newly formed Citizen Police Accountability Board. She had ultimately accepted the mayor's invitation to serve, believing that real change required engagement rather than retreat. The board consisted of 12 community members from diverse backgrounds: a retired judge, a social worker, a civil rights attorney, a pastor, a small business owner, and others who brought different perspectives to the table. Today, they were reviewing the findings of the independent investigation into Officer Miller's conduct and history with the department. The conference room was solemn as Detective Wilson, who had led the investigation, presented his report. "Our review of Officer Miller's record revealed a pattern of escalation and bias that should have raised red flags years ago," he explained, displaying a chart on the screen. He had 17 complaints in his 8 years with the department, compared to an average of 3 for other officers with similar experience. Aisha studied the data, feeling a complex mix of emotions. On one hand, it validated what she had experienced. Miller's treatment of her hadn't been a one-time lapse in judgment, but part of a troubling pattern. On the other hand, it highlighted a systemic failure that had allowed him to remain on patrol, despite these warning signs. "What happened to the previous complaints?" asked Mrs. Patel, a retired nurse who sat next to Aisha on the board. Detective Wilson sighed. 14 were dismissed without thorough investigation. 2 resulted in verbal warnings. 1 led to a 1-day suspension. "And who conducted those investigations?" asked Mr. Reynolds, the retired judge who chaired the board. "Internal Affairs," Detective Wilson replied. "Under the previous administration with procedures that lacked transparency and accountability." The discussion continued for over 2 hours as the board debated recommendations for systemic changes. Aisha mostly listened, taking careful notes and asking occasional questions. She was still finding her voice in this new role, but was committed to ensuring that what happened to her would lead to meaningful reforms. As the meeting wrapped up, Chief Wilson, who had replaced the previous chief after he resigned amid the fallout from Aisha's case, approached her. "Ms. Johnson, do you have a minute?" They stepped into a quiet hallway where the chief handed her a folder. "The district attorney's office just made their decision. I wanted you to hear it from me first before it hits the news." Aisha opened the folder with slightly trembling hands. "Criminal charges?" Chief Wilson nodded. "They're charging Miller with official misconduct, assault, and civil rights violations. Based on the video evidence and witness statements, they believe they have a strong case." Aisha closed the folder, processing this development. Miller had already been fired from the force 2 weeks after the incident, but criminal charges took things to another level. "How do you feel about this?" Chief Wilson asked carefully. Aisha considered the question. "I don't take any joy in someone else's downfall," she said finally. "But I do believe in accountability. What he did that day wasn't just wrong, it was illegal. And treating it as such sends an important message." On her drive home, Aisha took a detour past the spot where the incident had occurred. It looked so ordinary now, just a stretch of road near a small grocery store. No sign remained of the life-changing events that had unfolded there just weeks ago. Her phone rang through the car speakers. Tamika checking in, as she did every day. "How was the first day back?" "Good. Aisha replied, surprised at how much she meant it. Really good, actually. The kids were amazing, and the board meeting? Productive. Miller's being charged, by the way. Tamika was quiet for a moment. How do you feel about that? I'm still processing it, Aisha admitted. But it feels like justice is actually working for once. You should be proud, sis, Tamika said softly. What you've done, standing up, speaking out, staying engaged, it's making a real difference. After saying goodbye to her sister, Aisha continued home, reflecting on how much had changed in 3 short weeks. The community gathering in the park that Saturday after the incident had drawn over 3,000 people. What began as a local response had sparked similar gatherings in cities across the country, with people coming together to discuss police-community relations and necessary reforms. The police department had fast-tracked its body camera program, with every officer now required to record all interactions with the public. The mayor had redirected funding to create a mental health response team to handle calls that didn't require armed officers. And most significantly, a cultural shift seemed to be taking place within the department itself, with officers increasingly willing to speak out against misconduct rather than closing ranks. As Aisha pulled into her driveway, she noticed a small package on her porch. Inside was a handmade card from Tyler's family and a framed quote that read, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it." That evening, as she prepared for the next day's lessons, Aisha received an email from a teacher in a city 2,000 miles away. The woman explained that her school district had used the video of Aisha's encounter with Officer Miller as part of a new curriculum on civic responsibility and community engagement. Students had discussed not only the injustice Aisha faced, but also the positive changes that had come from her willingness to speak up and stay involved. Your story has become a powerful teaching tool, the email concluded. You've shown students that one person can make a difference, that injustice can be confronted, and that communities can come together to create positive change. Aisha sat back in her chair, moved by the thought that her painful experience was now helping others learn and grow. When she had been pulled over that Friday afternoon, she had been just a teacher heading home after work. Now, without seeking it, she had become something more, a catalyst for change, a voice for accountability, a symbol of resilience. 6 months later, Aisha stood at a podium in the city council chambers addressing a packed room. The Citizen Police Accountability Board was presenting its first comprehensive report, outlining both the progress made and the work still to be done. The journey toward justice is rarely straight or simple, she told the audience. What happened to me that day was not unique. Similar incidents happen across our country every day. What was unique was that mine was caught on camera, that bystanders were brave enough to speak up, and that our community was ready for change. She looked out at the faces before her, city officials, police officers, community members, even some of her students and their families who had come to support her. The backlash against injustice that followed wasn't just about one officer or one incident, she continued. It was about a community saying collectively that we deserve better, that we demand better, and that we're willing to work together to create better. After the presentation, as people mingled and discussed the report, Aisha found herself standing next to Captain Thomas, who had been the first to recognize the wrongness of Officer Miller's actions that fateful day. You know, he said quietly, in my 27 years on the force, I've seen a lot of incidents cause anger and division, but I've never seen one lead to so much positive change.